My name is Samantha Mitchell, and at 31 years old, I found myself shrinking in my seat at Le Chateau, an upscale restaurant where my brother Ryan's engagement dinner was unfolding. The familiar knot in my stomach tightened as my mother clinked her glass, standing to address the room. Her eyes, cold with disappointment, flickered to me before she smiled at everyone else. "While Ryan has always made us proud," she began, her voice honey-sweet with poison underneath, "poor Samantha here has struggled to find her way." My cheeks burned as 20 pairs of eyes turned to me. If you're watching this from somewhere around the world, I'd love to know where. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to find out what happened when my brother's fiancé discovered who I really was. Growing up as Eleanor Mitchell's daughter meant living under a microscope that magnified flaws and minimized achievements. From elementary school spelling bees to college applications, nothing I accomplished ever seemed to meet her exacting standards. My mother, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and country club membership, had mapped out my life before I was born. Prestigious university, law school, marriage to someone from the right family, and a socially enviable career. My brother Ryan, 2 years younger, somehow always managed to hit the benchmarks that made Mom beam with pride. His A- were celebrated while my A+ came with questions about why I hadn't joined more extracurriculars. When we both got into Ivy League schools, his acceptance was framed and displayed in the living room. Mine was mentioned in passing, with the caveat that it wasn't as competitive the year Samantha applied. "You need to understand," my father Thomas once told me in a rare moment of candor when I was 16 and crying after Mom criticized my valedictorian speech draft, "Your mother just wants what's best for you." Dad was always the peacekeeper, the gentle counterbalance to Mom's razor-sharp expectations, but his peacekeeping often meant staying silent when I needed an advocate. I did everything right at first. I followed the blueprint, graduated summa cum laude from Columbia, earned my law degree from Harvard, and landed a position at Prescott and Walsh, one of New York's most cutthroat corporate law firms. For 2 years, I worked 80-hour weeks defending companies that made me feel physically ill with their ethical violations. I made more money than I could spend and lost more of myself than I could afford. The breaking point came when I was assigned to defend a pharmaceutical company that had knowingly marketed a medication with dangerous side effects to low-income communities. I still remember sitting in my sleek office at 2 a.m., staring at documents showing executives joking about acceptable casualties while I prepared arguments to shield them from justice. I quit the next day. Mom didn't speak to me for 3 months after I left Prescott and Walsh. When she finally called, it was to inform me that she'd told the ladies at her garden club I was taking a sabbatical to find myself rather than admit I'd abandoned the path she'd chosen. What my mother never bothered to learn was what I did after leaving corporate law. With my savings and legal knowledge, I founded Mitchell Consulting Group, specializing in helping nonprofit organizations navigate legal challenges, secure funding, and maximize their impact. My first client was a small environmental justice organization fighting against illegal dumping in underserved neighborhoods. I helped them secure a settlement that funded community health initiatives for a decade. While my mother was telling everyone I had thrown away my potential, I was building something meaningful. Within 3 years, my consulting firm had grown to a team of 15 dedicated professionals. We'd helped secure over $200 million in funding for various causes and provided legal strategies that changed harmful policies across multiple states. But explaining this to Eleanor Mitchell was like describing colors to someone who refused to open their eyes. "Pro bono work is something you do on weekends for social standing, Samantha," she said dismissively when I tried to tell her about a major victory for a housing rights coalition. "It's not a career." So I stopped trying to make her understand. In our infrequent family gatherings, I became adept at deflecting questions about my work with vague answers about consulting and quickly changing the subject. It was easier than watching her eyes glaze over with disinterest or, worse, narrow with disapproval. Ryan and I maintained a cordial relationship despite, everything. He followed the expected path: medical school, residency at a prestigious hospital, and now engagement to Alyssa Taylor, the daughter of a well-respected surgeon. I didn't blame him for playing the game better than I could. We were raised in the same household, but seemed to absorb different lessons. He thrived under pressure while it nearly crushed me. I'd met Alyssa only once before at a brief Sunday brunch 6 months earlier. She seemed nice enough, polite, well-educated, and clearly besotted with my brother. We barely spoke beyond pleasantries as my mother dominated the conversation with wedding planning suggestions and thinly veiled demands disguised as helpful advice. When the engagement dinner invitation arrived, my first instinct was to decline. The thought of enduring an entire evening of my mother's subtle jabs while surrounded by extended family and virtual strangers made my stomach churn. But Ryan had called personally to ask me to come. "It would mean a lot to me, Sam," he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. "Alyssa really wants to get to know you better." So I agreed, bought a new dress I couldn't really afford, wrapped a thoughtful gift I spent weeks selecting, and prepared myself for an evening of smiling through gritted teeth. What I couldn't have prepared for was how that night would completely reshape my family's perception of me and, perhaps more importantly, my perception of myself. Le Chateau was exactly the type of restaurant my mother would choose: French name, exorbitant prices, and waitstaff that looked down their noses at anyone who mispronounced the specials. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white linen tablecloths and polished silverware. A private room had been reserved for our party of 20, with floral arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to slip in quietly and find a seat near the edge of the gathering. Instead, I walked straight into my mother's critical gaze. "Samantha," she said, eyes sweeping from my carefully styled hair down to my shoes. "That dress is a bit bright for an evening event, don't you think?" The dress in question was a deep emerald green that the boutique owner had assured me was perfectly appropriate for a formal dinner. I'd saved for weeks to afford it. "Hello to you too, Mom," I replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and disapproval. "Your father's at the bar," she said, already turning away to inspect the place settings. "Try not to wrinkle your outfit before everyone arrives." I found Dad nursing a scotch, his tie slightly loosened. His face brightened when he saw me. "There's my girl," he said, standing to embrace me. "You look beautiful, Sam." "Thanks, Dad." I slid onto the bar stool beside him. "How's retirement treating you?" We chatted about his golf game and the renovation project he'd started in the basement, safe topics that wouldn't lead to tension. As other guests began to arrive, we moved to the dining room where I positioned myself at the far end of the table, next to my father's empty chair and across from Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister who was at least moderately kind to me. The room buzzed with conversation as relatives and friends of both families trickled in. My mother floated between groups, playing the perfect hostess while my father made introductions. I remained in my seat, smiling politely when necessary but otherwise trying to blend into the background. A hush fell over the room when Ryan and Alyssa made their entrance. They looked like they'd stepped out of a bridal magazine, Ryan handsome in a tailored suit, Alyssa radiant in a pale blue dress that complemented her blonde hair and blue eyes. My brother's face was relaxed and happy in a way I rarely saw at family gatherings. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he announced, his arm around Alyssa's waist. "We're so grateful to have our families together to celebrate our engagement." Applause and cheers followed. I clapped along, genuinely happy for my brother despite everything else. When the couple made their way around the room greeting guests, I stood to hug Ryan. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "I'm really happy for you." "Thanks for coming, Sam," he replied, squeezing my shoulder. "It means a lot." Alyssa stepped forward to embrace me as well. "Samantha, I'm so glad you could make it," she said warmly. Up close, I noticed intelligence in her eyes that I hadn't registered during our brief previous meeting. "This is for you both," I said, handing over the carefully wrapped package. Inside was a first edition of a poetry collection Ryan had loved in college. It had taken weeks of searching online auctions to find. As they moved on to greet others, I returned to my seat and braced myself for the inevitable interrogation from relatives I rarely saw. "Still doing that volunteer work, Samantha?" asked Uncle Robert, my mother's brother who had never quite grasped what consultants do. "It's not volunteer work," I corrected gently. "I run a consulting firm." Right, he nodded dismissively. "Eleanor mentioned you left that big law firm. Shame about that. Such good benefits in those places." Before I could respond, Aunt Margaret leaned across the table. "Any special someone in your life, dear?" "You're not getting any younger, you know." "I'm focusing on my career right now," I answered, the practiced response rolling off my tongue. "Well, that's nice," she replied with the kind of smile reserved for people you pity. Throughout these exchanges, I noticed Alyssa glancing in my direction several times with a curious expression. Initially, I assumed she was just trying to keep track of all the new faces, but there was something more to her looks, a question, perhaps, or a sense of recognition she couldn't quite place. Richard and Catherine Taylor, Alyssa's parents, were seated near the head of the table beside my mother. Dr. Taylor was as imposing as his reputation suggested, tall, distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and an authoritative presence. His wife was elegantly dressed and possessed the same warm smile as her daughter. They nodded politely when we were introduced, but were quickly swept into conversation with my mother. "Isn't it wonderful?" I overheard Mom saying to Mrs. Taylor, "when your children make you proud?" Ryan has always been so focused, so driven to succeed. The implication hung in the air, unlike her daughter, who had squandered her opportunities. Once everyone was seated and the appetizers served, my mother took control of the evening as she always did. Standing to offer the first toast, she commanded attention with practiced ease. "We are so blessed to welcome Alyssa into our family," she began, glass raised. Ryan has always made the right choices in life, from his educational path to his career, and now in choosing a partner who complements him so perfectly. I took a large sip of wine, recognizing the familiar preamble to what would inevitably become a comparison. "Of course, not all of us find our way so easily," Mom continued, her gaze shifting deliberately toward me. My stomach dropped as I realized she was about to launch into one of her favorite topics. How Samantha threw away her potential. "Many of you know that both of my children were blessed with intelligence and opportunity," my mother continued, her voice taking on the performative tone she used when building up to something she considered dramatically important. "Ryan, of course, used his gifts wisely. But our Samantha..." She paused for effect, and I stared intently at my salad, counting the cherry tomatoes, 7, as if they held the secret to disappearing entirely. Samantha was at Prescott and Walsh, one of the most prestigious law firms in New York. She informed everyone, though most of the family had heard this story multiple times. Partner track, corner office with a view of Central Park, the kind of position thousands of law graduates would kill for. I felt my brother's eyes on me from across the table but couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. "And then one day," Mom continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper, "she just quit. No notice, no backup plan. Walked away from a 6-figure salary to do." "What was it again, dear?" She turned to me with faux innocence. "I started my own consulting business," I said quietly, knowing the words would fall on deaf ears. Mom waved her hand dismissively. Yes. Something with charities. Pro bono work, essentially. Such a waste of a Harvard education, wouldn't you agree, Richard? She directed this to Alyssa's father, clearly expecting alliance from a fellow professional. Dr. Taylor looked uncomfortable, but managed a non-committal. Different paths work for different people. "So diplomatic," Mom laughed, undeterred. "But we all know the truth. When you've been given every advantage and end up barely making rent in a tiny apartment while your classmates are making partner and buying summer homes, There's really no other word for it but failure. The room grew uncomfortably silent. I could feel the collective embarrassment of 20 people witnessing what should have been a private family matter if it needed to be discussed at all. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. Ryan shifted in his seat, conflict evident on his face, but he too remained silent. It's not just the career, of course, Mom pressed on, apparently emboldened by the lack of opposition. Samantha was engaged once. Did you all know that? To Andrew Harrington, the Harringtons of Boston. Brilliant match. But somehow she managed to lose him too. That was a particularly vicious twist of the knife. Andrew and I had ended our engagement mutually when we realized we wanted fundamentally different things in life. He wanted a wife who would prioritize his career and host dinner parties for his colleagues. I wanted a partner who supported my ambitions as much as I supported his. The breakup had been amicable. We occasionally still exchanged holiday cards, but my mother had framed it as yet another example of my inability to succeed at anything. Mom, Ryan finally interjected, his voice tight. Maybe we should focus on celebrating tonight. Oh, I'm not criticizing, she replied with a smile that suggested the exact opposite. I'm just catching everyone up on Samantha's unique journey. We're all family here, or about to be. She gestured inclusively at the Taylors. I could feel tears threatening and blinked rapidly to contain them. Making a scene would only make things worse. I took a deep breath and reached for my water glass, noticing my hand was trembling slightly. The point is, Mom continued, raising her glass again, that seeing Ryan's success makes it all worthwhile. At least one of my children understood the value of perseverance and tradition. To Ryan and Alyssa, may your lives together be filled with the success and stability that comes from making wise choices. To Ryan and Alyssa, everyone echoed, though many voices sounded subdued after the uncomfortable display. As the toast concluded and the main courses arrived, conversation gradually resumed around the table. I picked at my filet mignon, appetite long gone, and calculated how soon I could politely leave without drawing more attention to myself. Throughout this excruciating experience, I'd been vaguely aware of Alyssa's eyes returning to me repeatedly. Now, as I chanced a glance in her direction, I found her staring openly with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between confusion and recognition. She quickly looked away when our eyes met, leaning over to whisper something to Ryan that made him look at me with sudden interest. The dinner progressed with my mother holding court, sharing stories of Ryan's accomplishments through school and medical training. Each anecdote was carefully selected to highlight his dedication and success, and often contained a thinly veiled comparison to my supposed shortcomings. Ryan always understood the importance of networking, she told Alyssa's mother. Unlike Samantha, who burned bridges at her firm with that impulsive departure. I hadn't burned any bridges. My former boss had actually reached out twice, trying to persuade me to return, and I still maintained friendships with several colleagues. But contradicting Mom would only prolong the conversation. As dessert was served, a delicate crème brûlée that I couldn't bring myself to taste, I excused myself to use the restroom, desperate for a moment alone to recompose. I stood in front of the mirror, taking deep breaths and reminding myself that in a few hours, this would all be over. I could return to my life, to the work that fulfilled me even if my family couldn't see its value. I was just about to return to the dining room when the bathroom door opened and Alyssa stepped in. Samantha, Alyssa said, letting the heavy door swing shut behind her. Are you okay? I quickly dabbed at my eyes with a tissue, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just needed a moment. She moved to stand beside me at the mirrors, our reflections side by side, her perfectly styled and composed, me slightly disheveled from trying not to fall apart. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to proceed. I've been wanting to talk to you all evening, she finally said, turning to face me directly. Her expression had that same puzzled look I'd noticed during dinner. But I wasn't sure until, wait, you're Samantha Mitchell, right? As in, Mitchell Consulting Group. The question hit me like a physical force. No one in my family ever referred to my business by name. It was always Samantha's charity work or that consulting thing. Hearing Alyssa say it with what sounded like recognition made me momentarily speechless. Yes, I confirmed cautiously. That's my company. Alyssa's eyes widened, her expression transforming into something I rarely encountered in my family's presence: respect. Oh my God, she whispered. I knew you looked familiar, but I couldn't place it until your mother mentioned Harvard Law. You're the Samantha Mitchell? The one who developed the Community Impact Assessment Framework. I stared at her in disbelief. The CIF was indeed my creation, a comprehensive methodology for nonprofits to measure and communicate their effectiveness to potential donors and policymakers. It had revolutionized how many organizations approach their work and advocacy, but it wasn't exactly dinner table conversation in most circles. You know about that? I asked, still processing this unexpected turn. Know about it? Samantha, I use it every day. I'm the Director of Strategic Development at Boston Children's Alliance. Your framework helped us secure a $12 million grant last year that's funding pediatric mental health services across the state. The bathroom suddenly felt very small. Alyssa Taylor wasn't just my brother's fiancée. She was a professional in my field who apparently knew my work intimately. And based on her position, a highly accomplished one. I had no idea you worked in nonprofit development, I said, my brain scrambling to realign everything I thought I knew about this woman and this evening. 5 years now, she nodded. We've even used your consulting services. Not directly with you, unfortunately. I worked with Jessica from your team on a regulatory compliance issue last spring. Jessica Chin was my most experienced senior consultant who specialized in healthcare regulations. She's brilliant, I said automatically, professional pride momentarily overriding my emotional turmoil. She said the same about you, Alyssa replied. But wait, I don't understand. The way your mother was talking, does your family not know what you actually do? I leaned back against the cool marble counter, suddenly exhausted by the weight of pretense. They know I consult for nonprofits, I explained. They just don't think it matters. In my mother's world, if you're not making partner at a white shoe law firm or marrying into the right family, you're failing. The fact that I help organizations secure funding for causes I believe in rather than helping corporations avoid liability is, to her, a waste of my education. Alyssa's expression shifted from confusion to indignation. But your work is transformative. The Mitchell Group is practically legendary in our field. When we found out Ryan's last name was Mitchell, I actually joked with my team that I should ask if he was related to the Mitchells, but I never seriously considered. I mean, what are the odds? A strange laugh escaped me, half amusement, half the release of years of pent-up frustration. Pretty slim, apparently. You won the Kaufman Award last month, she continued, referring to a prestigious recognition in the nonprofit sector that came with a substantial grant. There was a feature about you in Impact Quarterly. Your equity-centered approach to nonprofit consultation has literally changed how the entire sector approaches community development. Hearing my achievements listed so matter-of-factly by someone who actually understood their significance was both validating and surreal. My family doesn't read Impact Quarterly, I said with a small smile. And I stopped trying to explain my work to them years ago. It's easier to let them think I'm struggling than to constantly defend a choice they'll never understand. Alyssa shook her head in disbelief. I don't even know what to say. Ryan never mentioned any of this. Ryan doesn't know, I admitted. We don't really talk about our careers beyond surface details. I think he assumes I'm doing small-scale local work, not. I gestured vaguely. Not running one of the most innovative consulting firms in the social impact space, Alyssa finished for me. Her eyes suddenly lit up with determination. This is ridiculous, Samantha. Your family is celebrating my engagement to Ryan while treating you like some kind of disappointment, when in reality, you're an absolute rock star in your field. It's fine, I said automatically, the deflection practiced after years of diminishment. I've made peace with it. Well, I haven't, she replied firmly. And I don't think Ryan would be okay with this either if he knew the truth. Is there a reason you've kept your success from them? I considered the question seriously. At first, it was because I wanted to prove myself before facing their judgment. Then, when we started gaining recognition, I tried to tell them, but my mother would immediately change the subject or make some comment about real law. Eventually, I just stopped trying. Alyssa took my hand impulsively. Samantha, I can't sit through the rest of this dinner pretending I don't know who you actually are. Would it be okay if I said something? A flutter of panic mixed with a strange sense of relief rose in my chest. What would you say? The truth, she said simply. I'm about to become part of this family, and I can't start that journey with such a fundamental misunderstanding hanging over us. Plus, she added with a slight smile, I've been a fan of your work for years. Professional integrity demands I acknowledge that. For a moment, I imagined it. The looks on my family's faces, my mother's disbelief, the potential for a different kind of relationship moving forward. It was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. Okay, I finally said, surprising myself. But maybe we should go back before they send a search party. As we walked back to the dining room, Alyssa squeezed my arm reassuringly. Just follow my lead. We returned to find dessert being cleared and coffee being served. My absence had apparently gone largely unnoticed, as my mother was in the middle of sharing yet another anecdote about Ryan's surgical residency. There he was, assisting on a procedure most residents wouldn't even be allowed to observe until their third year, she was saying proudly. Alyssa and I slipped back into our seats. Ryan gave his fiancée a curious look, clearly sensing something had changed, but she just smiled and placed her hand over his on the table. When there was a natural pause in the conversation, Alyssa spoke up. Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask more about Samantha's work. You mentioned she consults for nonprofits. My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, something like that. More coffee, Catherine. She tried to redirect to Alyssa's mother. Actually, Alyssa persisted pleasantly. I'm quite interested because I work in nonprofit development myself. Boston Children's Alliance, she added for the benefit of the table. How lovely, my mother said dismissively. Volunteer work is so important. Oh, it's not volunteer work, Alyssa corrected her. I'm the Director of Strategic Development. We manage a $30 million annual operating budget and serve thousands of children across Massachusetts. There was a new note of respect in my mother's voice when she responded. That's quite impressive, Alyssa. Your parents must be proud. Thank you, they are, Alyssa agreed before smoothly continuing. That's actually how I first became familiar with Samantha's work. Her consulting firm has revolutionized how organizations like mine approach sustainable funding and program evaluation. A confused silence fell over the table. My father paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, looking between Alyssa and me with furrowed brows. I think there must be some confusion, my mother said with a tight laugh. Samantha does small-scale consulting work, pro bono primarily. Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, Alyssa continued, her tone respectful but firm, Mitchell Consulting Group is one of the most respected firms in our field. Their community impact assessment framework has become the gold standard for nonprofits seeking to demonstrate program effectiveness to major donors and government agencies. All eyes turned to me. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, but forced myself to sit straight and meet their gazes. Is this true, Samantha? My father asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Before I could answer, Alyssa continued, my organization paid a substantial consulting fee to work with Samantha's team last year. The strategies they developed helped us secure a $12 million multi-year grant. There's nothing pro bono about it. My mother's expression had frozen somewhere between disbelief and irritation. Well, I'm sure it's very nice, she managed. But it's hardly the career she was trained for at Harvard. Interesting you should mention Harvard, Alyssa replied, pulling out her phone. They featured Samantha in their alumni magazine last fall. I happened to save the article because it was so inspiring. May I? She held up her phone, seeking permission to share. Without waiting for a response, she began reading. Harvard Law graduate Samantha Mitchell has redefined success in the legal consulting space. As founder and CEO of Mitchell Consulting Group, she has built a firm that bridges the gap between legal expertise and social impact. Under her leadership, MCG has helped secure over $500 million in funding for organizations addressing society's most pressing challenges. The article continued, detailing our work with environmental justice initiatives, healthcare access programs, and educational equity projects. As Alyssa read, I watched the expressions around the table transform: confusion, reassessment, and in some cases, dawning respect. That can't be right, my mother interrupted. Samantha lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. If her business were that successful, surely she'd have a more appropriate living situation. I finally found my voice. I choose to live simply, Mom. The majority of our profits are reinvested in the business and our foundation, which provides grants to grassroots organizations that might not qualify for traditional funding. The Mitchell Foundation? Dr. Taylor suddenly interjected, fully engaged for the first time all evening. Your foundation funded the pilot program for rural telehealth services that we're implementing at Boston Medical Center. Yes, that's one of our initiatives, I confirmed. But why haven't we heard about any of this? Ryan asked, looking genuinely perplexed. Sam, if you're doing this kind of work, why keep it secret? It wasn't a secret, I said quietly. I tried to talk about it many times. But whenever I brought up my work, the subject was changed or dismissed. That's hardly fair, my mother protested. We always ask about your work at family gatherings. You ask if I'm still doing that nonprofit thing, Mom. You've never once asked for details or shown any interest in understanding what I actually do. Well, it's not exactly easy to understand, she countered defensively. All those acronyms and social justice terminology. Samantha won the Kaufman Award last month, Alyssa interjected. It's essentially the nonprofit equivalent of the MacArthur Genius Grant. There was a black tie ceremony at the Waldorf. You never mentioned any award, my father said, looking hurt. Would it have mattered? I asked honestly. The last time I tried to share good news about work, Mom said, and I quote, "That's nice, dear, but when are you going to get back to real law?" My mother had the grace to look slightly abashed, though she quickly recovered. Well, how were we supposed to know it was important? You always downplay everything. I stopped sharing because you stopped listening, I replied, surprising myself with my candor. Years of suppressed frustration were finally finding voice. Do you have any idea how painful it is to sit here and be called a failure when I've built something I'm deeply proud of? Something that's actually making a difference in people's lives. We've always supported you, my mother insisted. No, Mom. You've always tolerated me. There's a difference. A heavy silence fell over the table. My brother was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. My father looked stricken. Alyssa's parents were exchanging meaningful glances, clearly reassessing everything they'd heard about me before tonight. Perhaps, Dr. Taylor said carefully, breaking the tension, we should all take a moment to celebrate both Mitchell siblings. It seems excellence runs in the family, just in different forms. I had no idea, Ryan said, shaking his head. Sam, why didn't you ever tell me? Would it have changed anything? I asked, not unkindly. We all fell into our assigned roles a long time ago. You're the success story, I'm the cautionary tale. It was easier to accept that dynamic than constantly fight against it. I would have been proud to tell people about your work, he said with quiet sincerity. I am proud, now that I know. Something small and wounded inside me began to heal at those words. Well, my mother said, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative, I suppose we should have paid more attention. Of course we're proud of you too, Samantha. We've always said you're smart." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Eleanor Mitchell, it was practically a full concession. "Thank you," I said simply, not wanting to push further and escalate the situation. "So the Mitchell name is making waves in both medicine and nonprofit leadership," Alyssa's father observed, raising his glass. "I'd say that deserves a proper toast." As glasses were raised again, this time in recognition of both Mitchell's siblings' accomplishments, I caught Alyssa's eye across the table. She gave me a small, conspiratorial smile, and in that moment I knew I'd found an unexpected ally. As the evening began to wind down, the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had started as yet another exercise in enduring my family's disappointment had somehow shifted into something I'd never experienced before: genuine interest in my work and accomplishments. "So this community impact framework," my father asked, having moved to sit beside me, "you developed that yourself?" With my team, I nodded. We spent almost a year refining the methodology. The basic premise is that traditional metrics don't capture the full scope of how social programs affect communities. We created a more holistic approach that measures not just direct outcomes, but ripple effects through various systems. "That sounds complicated," he admitted. "It can be," I smiled. "But the results speak for themselves. Organizations using our framework have seen an average increase of 40% in grant funding because they can demonstrate their impact more effectively." Dad looked thoughtful. "I always knew you were smart, Sam. But this is beyond smart. It's innovative. I wish I'd understood sooner." "You never asked," I said, then immediately regretted the accusatory tone. "I mean, I could have tried harder to explain it." "No," he said firmly. "You're right. We never asked the right questions. We were so fixated on the path we thought you should take that we couldn't see the value in the one you chose." He hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry for that." Across the room, Ryan had broken away from a conversation with Alyssa's parents to approach us. "Mind if I join?" he asked, pulling up a chair. When Dad excused himself to refill his drink, Ryan leaned in. "Sam, I feel terrible. All this time, I had no idea what you were actually doing." "It's not your fault," I assured him. "It kind of is," he countered. I bought into the family narrative without questioning it. I should have asked more questions, shown more interest. He shook his head. "Some brother I am." "You're not a bad brother, Ryan. Maybe not bad, but definitely oblivious. And complicit." He looked genuinely troubled. "How many times have I sat there while Mom diminished your work, and I just let it happen?" I couldn't argue with that. "Water under the bridge." "No, it's not," he insisted. "Things are going to be different going forward. I promise." Before I could respond, my mother appeared, her social smile firmly in place, but strain visible around her eyes. "Well, this has been quite the illuminating evening," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Samantha, you should have told us about this award. We would have attended the ceremony." It was such a characteristic response, making her absence my responsibility, that I almost laughed. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I replied honestly. "Of course we'd be interested in our daughter receiving an award," she said, sounding wounded. "I've always supported your choices." Ryan made a sound that might have been a suppressed snort. "Mom," he said with unusual firmness, "I think we both know that's not entirely true. You've made it pretty clear over the years that you thought Sam was wasting her potential." Our mother looked genuinely startled to hear Ryan challenge her version of reality. "I only ever wanted what was best for both of you." "What you thought was best," I corrected gently. "But we're adults now. We get to decide that for ourselves." She seemed about to argue, but was interrupted by the approach of Alyssa's parents. "Eleanor, Thomas," Dr. Taylor said warmly, "we want to thank you for a lovely evening. And may I say, both your children are quite remarkable. You must be very proud." For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I watched my mother include me in her proud maternal smile without qualification or hesitation. "Yes, we certainly are." As the evening drew to a close, Alyssa found a moment to speak with me privately. I hope I didn't overstep, she said. It just seemed so wrong that your family didn't know. You didn't overstep, I assured her. Actually, I think you might have done me a huge favor. Though I'm still processing exactly what happened tonight. Well, for what it's worth, I'm really looking forward to having you as a sister-in-law, she said. And not just because of your professional reputation, though I admit that's a pretty exciting bonus. I'm looking forward to it too, I replied, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. Though I should warn you, my mother will probably try to recruit you as an ally in her ongoing campaign to improve me. Alyssa laughed. I think I can handle Eleanor Mitchell. And besides, she added with a conspiratorial smile, I'm pretty good at advocating for causes I believe in. It's literally my job. As I gathered my things to leave, Ryan caught me by the door. Sam, I was thinking, maybe we could get lunch next week? I'd really like to hear more about your work. For real this time. The simple sincerity in his voice made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I'd like that. And maybe, he added hesitantly, you could help with some of the wedding planning? Alyssa would love your input. Are you sure Mom would be okay with that? I asked skeptically. Ryan's expression hardened slightly. Mom doesn't get to dictate everything anymore. This is our wedding, and we want you involved. If that's a problem for her, she'll have to adjust. It was such an un-Ryan-like statement, at least the Ryan I thought I knew, that I couldn't help but smile. In that case, I'd be happy to help. As I headed home that night, replaying the evening's unexpected turns, I realized something profound had shifted. For years, I'd been living two separate lives, my real one filled with meaningful work and accomplishment, and the diminished version I presented to my family to avoid conflict. For the first time, I could envision those worlds merging, not without friction, certainly, but with the possibility of genuine understanding. My phone buzzed with a text from Alyssa. Forgot to mention, we should talk about having your foundation involved with the wedding. Instead of favors, maybe a donation and guests' names? Call me tomorrow. I smiled at the screen. It seemed I wasn't just gaining a sister-in-law, I was gaining an ally. In the months following that fateful dinner, the landscape of my family relationships underwent a transformation I never thought possible. The revelation of my professional success didn't magically fix decades of dysfunction, but it created openings where before there had only been walls. Alyssa became not just a sister-in-law, but a true friend. Our shared passion for social impact work gave us common ground that quickly developed into genuine affection. We began meeting for coffee every other week, sometimes to discuss wedding plans, but more often to exchange ideas about our respective work. Her perspective on community engagement strategies proved invaluable for a major initiative we were launching, and I was able to connect her organization with several potential donors from my network. You know, she told me during one of our meetings, Ryan talks about you differently now. He's actually bragging about his big sister, the social impact guru, to his colleagues. The change in my relationship with Ryan was perhaps the most profound. Our lunch to discuss my work turned into a 3-hour conversation, the first real dialogue we'd had as adults. He asked thoughtful questions and shared his own frustrations with the medical system's approach to underserved communities. I always thought you left law because you couldn't handle the pressure, he admitted. I never considered you might have left because you had stronger principles than I did. Different principles, I corrected him. Not stronger. We're just wired differently. Maybe, he conceded. But I've been thinking a lot about why I chose the path I did. How much was because I truly wanted it versus how much was because it was expected? Having second thoughts about medicine? I asked, concerned. No, I love surgery, he assured me. But I'm reconsidering my specialty. I've always been pushed toward cardiothoracic because it's prestigious and lucrative. But lately, I've been drawn to pediatric reconstructive surgery. There's incredible need, especially for kids without access to specialized care. It was a small shift in perspective, but it represented something significant. Ryan thinking beyond our mother's narrow definition of success to consider his own values and desires. My father made his own efforts to bridge the gap between us. He began sending me articles about nonprofit initiatives he came across, sometimes with awkwardly worded but heartfelt notes, reminded me of your work. Very impressive what these organizations accomplish with limited resources. Like what you do, I imagine. Mom was, well, still Mom. Her transformation was less dramatic but noticeable in its own way. She began introducing me to her friends with a new script. This is my daughter Samantha, the CEO. She just won a major award in her field. She still didn't fully understand or value what I did, but she had at least recognized that others did, which in Eleanor Mitchell's world was almost the same thing. When Alyssa asked me to be a bridesmaid, I initially hesitated, worried about the additional family exposure. But Ryan added his own plea. It would mean a lot to both of us, Sam. You're not just my sister. You're someone we both respect and want standing with us. How could I say no to that? The wedding planning process brought its own challenges. My mother had definite ideas about everything from the floral arrangements to the seating chart, but true to his word, Ryan began standing firm on issues that mattered to him and Alyssa. And to my surprise, he often backed me up when Mom tried to revert to her old patterns. Mom, he said firmly during one tense planning lunch when she made a dismissive comment about my suggestion for the rehearsal dinner, Sam's input is valuable. If you can't be supportive, maybe we should continue this conversation another time. The look of shock on her face was almost comical. Her golden child setting boundaries was apparently more effective than decades of my attempts to do the same. The wedding itself was beautiful, tasteful and elegant as befitted a Mitchell event, but with thoughtful touches that reflected Ryan and Alyssa's values. Instead of traditional favors, they made a substantial donation to a pediatric mental health initiative, with small cards at each place setting explaining the impact this gift would have on children's lives. During the reception, as I stood near the gift table adjusting my bridesmaid's dress, a surprisingly flattering shade of blue that Alyssa had thoughtfully selected to complement all her attendants, a tall man with kind eyes approached me. You must be Samantha, he said, extending his hand. I'm Marcus, Alyssa's cousin from Chicago. Nice to meet you, I replied, noticing his warm smile. Alyssa talks about you all the time, he continued. I work in community development back home, so I've actually used your impact framework. It's revolutionized how we approach our neighborhood revitalization projects. What followed was one of the most engaging conversations I'd had in months, a discussion about urban planning, community voice, and equitable development that left me both intellectually stimulated and personally intrigued. When he asked for my number to continue our discussion about participatory program design, I found myself blushing like a teenager. 6 months later, Marcus and I were dating long distance, managing to see each other at least twice a month despite our busy schedules. He understood my work in a way few men I'd dated ever had, and his own commitment to community-centered development aligned perfectly with my values. At Ryan and Alyssa's first dinner party as a married couple, my mother actually bragged about me to their guests. Samantha's organization just expanded to open an office in Chicago, she announced. Though I suspect that has as much to do with a certain young man as with business strategy. She winked at Marcus, who squeezed my hand under the table. Actually, Mom, I corrected her gently, we've had plans to expand to the Midwest for over a year. Marcus is a lovely bonus, but not the reason for our business decisions. Instead of becoming defensive, she laughed. Always the professional. Well, whatever the reason, we're proud of your success. Those words, we're proud of your success, without qualification or comparison, were something I'd waited decades to hear. Later that evening, as Marcus and I walked back to my apartment, he asked, Does it bother you that your mom still doesn't quite get it? The importance of what you do? I considered the question carefully. It used to devastate me, I admitted. But now I realize her approval was never the point. The work itself, the impact we're having, that's what matters. I spent so many years feeling like a failure because I didn't meet someone else's definition of success. Once I embraced my own definition, everything changed. "And what is your definition?" he asked curiously. "Creating something meaningful. Making a tangible difference in people's lives. Building relationships based on mutual respect and shared values." I glanced at him with a smile. Being able to look in the mirror and feel good about the choices I've made, even when they're the harder path. The journey from that humiliating engagement dinner to where I stood now hadn't been simple or straightforward. There were still moments when old family patterns reasserted themselves, when my mother's approval seemed conditional, when I doubted my choices. But those moments no longer defined me or my relationships. The greatest lesson I'd learned was that living authentically, being true to your values even when others don't understand them, isn't just personally fulfilling. Paradoxically, it's also the path to genuine connection. By finally allowing my family to see my authentic self, warts and accomplishments alike, I'd opened the door to the kind of relationships I'd always wanted but never thought possible. Being underestimated turned out to be an unexpected gift. It taught me self-reliance and helped me develop an internal compass that guided my decisions rather than seeking external validation. And when recognition finally came, it was sweeter for having been earned entirely on my own terms. If you're watching this and feeling unappreciated or misunderstood by the people who should support you most, know that your worth isn't determined by their perception. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least equipped to see our true potential, not because they don't love us, but because their vision is clouded by their own expectations and limitations. Have you ever had a moment when someone finally recognized your value after years of being underestimated? Or have you found success in a path your family didn't understand? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found value in my journey, please hit that subscribe button and like this video so others can find it too. Remember, sometimes the greatest success is simply becoming the person you were meant to be, regardless of who understands that journey. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to follow your own authentic path.